You have $9 million, Margaret. The least you can do is give your own sister what she needs. Those were the words my sister said while we sat around my Christmas dinner table, surrounded by people I had loved my entire life. I looked at the faces around me, waiting for someone to tell her that maybe she had gone too far. No one did. Instead, I watched my family sit quietly, as if they were all waiting for my answer. My name is Margaret Caldwell. I was 67 years old, and that Christmas evening was the moment I finally understood something I had spent years refusing to accept. My family did not see my heart before they saw my money. The house was decorated exactly the way it had been every December for more than 30 years. The fireplace was glowing. The Christmas tree lights reflected across the windows. The dining table was covered with my best china, the same set my husband and I bought when we first moved into our home in Connecticut. I had spent the entire day preparing that dinner because I believed Christmas was about bringing people together. I made the turkey, prepared the mashed potatoes, baked the pies, and placed small gifts beside each plate. I even wrote handwritten notes for everyone because I wanted them to know how much they meant to me. I thought it would be a peaceful evening filled with memories. I never expected it to become the night my family revealed what they truly wanted. My younger sister Rebecca sat across from me at the table. She was 59 years old and had always been the person who compared our lives. When we were younger, she would joke that I was the lucky one. When I built my company, she said I had simply been in the right place at the right time. When my husband and I invested carefully over the years, she called it good fortune. She never saw the early mornings, the difficult decisions, or the sacrifices behind everything I had built. After my husband passed away, I continued managing my finances carefully. The sale of my company and years of investments had given me security. I had about $9 million, but I never lived like someone who wanted attention. I drove an older car. I enjoyed gardening. I donated quietly when I could. Money had always been a responsibility, not my identity. But that evening, sitting at my own Christmas table, I felt like my bank account had become the only thing my family noticed. Rebecca leaned forward and lowered her voice. "I do not understand why you are making this difficult," she said. "You have more than enough. You could change everything for me." I looked at her carefully. "Rebecca, what exactly are you asking me to do?" She sighed, almost as if my question surprised her. "I need help. A serious amount of help. And everyone here knows you can afford it." I looked around the table again. My niece avoided eye contact. My brother-in-law stared at his plate. Even my own relatives seemed uncomfortable, but nobody defended me. Instead, my nephew finally said, "Aunt Margaret, maybe you should think about family first." Family first. Those words stayed with me, because I had spent my entire life putting family first. I had helped when people needed support. I had opened my home during difficult times. I had given advice, time, and love without keeping score. But now, for the first time, I wondered if everyone had mistaken my kindness for an obligation. I took a slow breath and placed my napkin beside my plate. I did not yell. I did not argue. I simply looked at the people sitting around my table and realized something had changed. The hardest part was not that Rebecca wanted my money. The hardest part was realizing that everyone else had already decided she deserved it. That night, while the Christmas lights continued shining outside my window, I quietly made a promise to myself. I would find out who loved Margaret Caldwell, the person, and who only valued Margaret Caldwell, the woman with $9 million. The morning after that Christmas dinner, I woke up before sunrise. For a moment, everything felt normal. The house was quiet. The Christmas tree lights were still glowing in the corner of the living room. The smell of cinnamon from the candles I had burned the night before still lingered in the air. But then I remembered the conversation at the table, and the warmth of the holiday disappeared. I walked into the kitchen and looked at the place where my family had sat together only hours earlier. The empty chairs seemed to tell a story I had spent years refusing to hear. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the snow cover my backyard in a thin white layer. I thought about Rebecca's words. "You have $9 million. She said it like those numbers explained everything about me. Like my life could be measured by a bank statement. But what she did not see were the decades behind those numbers. She did not see the mornings when I woke up before everyone else to keep my business running. She did not see the nights when I worried about whether I was making the right choices. She did not see the moments when I wanted to quit but kept going because I knew my future depended on me. My success had not appeared overnight. It was built one decision at a time. When I was younger, Rebecca and I were very different people. She was outgoing, always surrounded by friends, always searching for excitement. I was quieter. I liked planning ahead. I believed in patience and consistency. Our parents used to say that our differences made us stronger. For many years, I believed that too. I never thought of myself as better than my sister. When I achieved something, I wanted to share it with her. When my husband and I bought our first home, I invited Rebecca over to celebrate. When my company began growing, I helped her whenever she needed support. I never kept track because that was not how I viewed family. But over time, something changed. Rebecca started seeing my achievements as something she was entitled to share. She would say things casually, almost jokingly. "You always seem to have everything figured out." Or, "It must be nice not having to worry about money." At first, I ignored those comments. I thought maybe she was simply frustrated with her own situation. I understood that life could be unfair sometimes. I never wanted my success to make someone I loved feel less important. But after my husband passed away, I started noticing something I had overlooked for years. Rebecca did not call just to ask how I was doing. She called when she needed something. A favor. Advice. Financial help. A solution. I always answered because she was my sister. I always listened because I remembered the little girl who used to sit beside me when we were young. But slowly, I began to wonder if I was holding on to a relationship that only existed because I kept giving. That thought hurt more than I wanted to admit. I walked into my office and opened an old wooden box where I kept important documents and memories. Inside were photos from years ago. There was one of Rebecca and me at my wedding. We were standing together, laughing like nothing could ever separate us. I held that picture for a long time. I did not want to believe that the sister in that photo was the same person who sat across from me demanding my money on Christmas. But people change. Sometimes they change slowly, and sometimes you only notice after something forces you to look closely. I returned the photo to the box and closed the lid. That afternoon, I called my financial advisor. Not because I had made a decision about Rebecca. Not yet. I called because I needed to understand my own choices clearly. For years, I had protected everyone else's feelings. Now I needed to protect my own future. As I sat at my desk reviewing my accounts, I realized something important. The money was never the real issue. The real issue was whether the people around me respected the woman who earned it. And for the first time, I was ready to find out the answer. The call with my financial advisor lasted less than an hour, but the questions it forced me to ask myself stayed with me for days. His name was Thomas Bennett, and he had managed my investments for more than 15 years. He knew the history behind every account, every decision, and every difficult moment that brought me to where I was today. When I explained what happened at Christmas dinner, he did not react with surprise. Instead, he simply asked, "Margaret, what do you want to do?" It was a simple question, but I realized no one had asked me that in a very long time. Everyone had been telling me what I should do. Rebecca wanted me to help her. My family wanted me to put family first. But no one had stopped to ask what I wanted for my own life. I sat quietly in my office, looking at the documents spread across my desk. The room was filled with memories. A photo of my husband and me from our anniversary. A small wooden box my father had given me years ago. A framed picture of the first building my company had purchased. These things reminded me that my life was not just a number written on a financial statement. It was a collection of choices, sacrifices, and moments that shaped who I became. "I want to understand my options," I told Thomas. "Not just financially. Personally." He nodded and began reviewing everything with me. We talked about my future plans, my charitable giving, my retirement, and the things I wanted to experience while I still had the health and energy to enjoy them. For the first time in years, I was planning my future around myself instead of around everyone else's expectations. A few days later, Rebecca called. I looked at my phone for a moment before answering. The old Margaret would have picked up immediately, ready to comfort her, explain herself, and avoid conflict. But I allowed the phone to ring twice before accepting the call. "Hi, Rebecca," I said. There was a pause. "Margaret, I've been thinking about Christmas." I listened. "I do not think you understand why I was upset," she said. That sentence caught my attention. Not because I was angry, but because it confirmed something I had felt for years. She was still focused on her disappointment, not on mine. "What do you think I do not understand?" I asked. "I just feel like you do not see how much I need your help." I looked out the window at the snow-covered yard. "Rebecca, I understand that you are going through a difficult time, but I need you to understand something too. My money does not mean my life has been easy. It does not mean I have unlimited responsibility for everyone else's choices." She became quiet. "So, you are saying you will not help me?" she asked. I took a breath before answering. "I am saying I need our relationship to be about more than what I can provide." The silence that followed felt different from the silence at Christmas dinner. This time, I was not waiting for someone else to decide my worth. I was simply speaking honestly. After we ended the call, I sat there for a long time. I felt sadness. Rebecca was my sister. A part of me still wished things could go back to the way they were when we were young. But I also knew I could not rebuild a relationship by pretending everything was fine. That evening, I opened an old family album. I found pictures of holidays, birthdays, and ordinary days that had once felt special. I saw Rebecca smiling beside me in many of those photos. We had shared so much history. That was why this hurt. It was not a stranger asking for my money. It was someone who shared my childhood asking me to prove my love through my bank account. The next morning, I made another appointment with Thomas. This time, I had a clear purpose. I was not looking for a way to punish anyone. I was looking for a way to make sure my future reflected my values. I wanted my choices to come from love, not pressure. Because I finally understood something I had ignored for years. Helping people because you love them is a beautiful thing. But allowing people to believe they are entitled to everything you have is something completely different. After my second meeting with Thomas, I drove home feeling different. Nothing outside had changed. The roads were the same. The houses along my street still had their winter decorations. The same familiar trees stood beside the sidewalk. But inside, I felt like I was finally seeing my own life clearly. For years, I had believed that being a good family member meant always being available. I thought love meant saying yes before anyone even finished asking. I thought generosity meant never questioning someone's reasons. But sitting across from Thomas had helped me understand something I had avoided for a long time. There is a difference between helping someone and allowing someone to depend on you without respect. That evening, I made myself dinner and sat at the same kitchen table where my family had gathered during Christmas. The decorations were still there. The candles were still on the shelf. But the room felt different. It was no longer the place where I felt judged. It was the place where I started making my own decisions. I opened my laptop and began reviewing my financial plans. I looked at the accounts I had built over decades. I looked at the documents that represented years of work. I looked at the plans I had created for my retirement, my home, and the causes I cared about. Then I noticed something important. Almost every decision I had made recently included someone else. I had planned for my sister's needs. I had considered my relatives' expectations. I had worried about disappointing people. But I had rarely asked myself what would bring me peace. The next morning, I called my attorney, Susan Parker. She had helped me with my estate planning after my husband passed away. She knew my values and understood that my decisions were never about showing power or control. They were about responsibility. When I explained that I wanted to review my plans, she asked a thoughtful question. "Margaret, are you making changes because you are hurt or because your priorities have changed?" I appreciated that question because it forced me to be honest. "Because my priorities have changed," I answered. "I still love my family. That has not changed. But I also need to respect myself." Susan smiled gently. "Then you are making a thoughtful decision, not an emotional one." Those words stayed with me. I did not want my family to think I was trying to punish them. I did not want my choices to come from anger. I wanted them to come from clarity. A few days later, I met Rebecca for coffee. It was the first time we had seen each other since Christmas. She arrived looking tired. The confidence she had shown at my dining table was gone. She sat across from me and wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "I have been thinking about what you said," she began. I listened. "Maybe I did make you feel like your money was more important than you." I looked at her carefully. It was not a perfect apology, but it was the first time she acknowledged that I had feelings too. "Rebecca," I said, "I do not need you to feel guilty. I need you to understand." She nodded slowly. "I think I forgot that you worked for everything you have." I looked out the window at people walking through the winter afternoon. That is what hurt the most. Not the request, the assumption. She lowered her eyes. "I thought because we were family, you would understand." I gave a small smile. Family should mean we understand each other. Not that one person sacrifices and everyone else expects it. We sat there quietly for a while. It was not the same silence as Christmas night. This silence had space for honesty. When I left the coffee shop, I still did not know what would happen with Rebecca. I did not know whether our relationship could return to what it once was. But I knew one thing. I was no longer afraid of setting boundaries. I had spent decades building a life I was proud of. It was time to make sure the people around me respected the woman behind that life, not just the money attached to it. After my conversation with Rebecca, I drove home feeling a mixture of emotions. I was relieved that she had finally listened, but I also knew that one honest conversation could not erase years of habits and expectations. Change does not happen because someone says the right words once. It happens when people make different choices again and again. That was something I had learned through experience. For a long time, I believed that if I loved someone enough, I could make every problem disappear. But I was beginning to understand that love could not replace respect. When I arrived home, I walked into my office and looked at the documents Susan had prepared. The papers represented something much bigger than money. They represented my choices, my independence, my ability to decide what my future would look like. I had spent decades building a life that gave me security, and now I wanted that security to support the things that mattered most to me. The following week, I invited a few close friends over for lunch. I did not invite them because I wanted to talk about Rebecca or my family situation. I invited them because I realized how much I had isolated myself while trying to keep everyone else happy. My friend Linda, who had known me since my early business years, noticed the change immediately. "Margaret, you seem lighter," she said while we sat at my kitchen table. I smiled. "I think I finally stopped carrying things that were never mine to carry." Linda understood. She had watched me spend years putting everyone else first. She remembered when I would leave important meetings early because a family member needed something. She remembered when I canceled vacations because someone else had a problem. "You know," she said, "there is a difference between being generous and being responsible for everyone's life." I thought about those words for a long time. That weekend, I made another decision. I wanted my money to reflect my values. I wanted to support causes that mattered to me. I wanted to help people who were truly struggling, not because they expected it, but because I chose to. I met with Susan again and discussed creating a charitable foundation in my husband's memory. It was something we had talked about years before he passed away. He always believed that success meant more when it could create something positive for others. As I worked through the details, I felt a sense of purpose returning. My family had made me question whether my success was a reason people cared about me. Now I was reminding myself that my success was also a reflection of my dedication and my values. A few days later, Rebecca called again. This time, her voice sounded different. "Margaret, I heard you are making changes with your plans." I knew what she meant. News traveled quickly in families, especially when money was involved. "Yes," I replied. "I am making decisions about my future." There was a pause. "Does that mean you are cutting us out?" she asked. I closed my eyes for a moment. That question revealed more than she probably realized. She was still thinking about what she might lose instead of what we might rebuild. "Rebecca," I said gently, "this is not about cutting anyone out. It is about making sure my choices come from my heart, not from pressure." She became quiet. I guess I never thought about it that way. I believed she was being honest. But honesty was only the beginning. Trust would take time. That evening, I looked around my home and felt a calmness I had not felt in months. The same walls that had heard my worries now surrounded a woman who was learning to make decisions without fear. I was not becoming cold. I was not turning my back on family. I was simply learning that love and boundaries could exist together. And for the first time in years, I was no longer afraid of disappointing people who had never been afraid of disappointing me. I thought the hardest part of this journey would be deciding what to do with my money. I was wrong. The hardest part was accepting that some people might see my boundaries as a betrayal. For years, I had been the person everyone could depend on. I was the one who answered every call, offered every solution, and tried to make every difficult situation easier. When I finally decided to step back, it felt strange, almost like I was doing something wrong. But then I reminded myself of something important. Taking care of myself was not the same as abandoning the people I loved. A few weeks after Christmas, my family began noticing the changes. Not dramatic changes, small ones. The kind that people notice only when they are used to someone always being available. I stopped answering every message immediately. I stopped offering financial advice unless someone specifically asked for my opinion. I stopped rearranging my schedule whenever someone else had a problem. I was still kind. I was still willing to help when I truly wanted to. But I was no longer living my life around everyone else's expectations. My niece, Emily, was the first person to notice. She called me one afternoon and asked if everything was okay. "You seem different, Aunt Margaret," she said. I smiled because she was right. I was different. "I think I am finally learning to slow down and enjoy my own life," I told her. There was a pause. Then she said something that surprised me. "I think everyone got so used to you taking care of things that we forgot you needed people to take care of you too." Her words stayed with me. Sometimes people do not realize they are taking too much from someone because that person makes giving look easy. A few days later, Rebecca came to visit me. This time, she did not come with a request. She came with questions. We sat in my living room, the same room where she had spent many holidays over the years. She looked around and said, "I never really thought about how much pressure you carried." I listened quietly. "I thought because you were successful, things were easier for you," she continued. "I thought having money meant you had fewer worries." I looked at her and said, "Money can make some things easier, but it does not protect you from feeling lonely. It does not make disappointment hurt less." Rebecca nodded slowly. For the first time, I felt like she was seeing the person behind the number. Not the woman with $9 million. Just Margaret, her sister. We talked for a long time that afternoon. We did not solve everything. There were still years of misunderstandings between us. But the conversation felt different because neither of us was trying to win. We were trying to understand. Before she left, Rebecca stood by the door and said, "I am sorry I made you feel like your value was connected to what you could give me." It was not a perfect apology, but it was real. And sometimes real is more important than perfect. After she left, I walked through my house and noticed how peaceful it felt. The same home where I once sat wondering if my family only cared about my resources now felt like a place where I could simply exist. I made tea, sat near the window, and watched the evening light settle over my garden. I thought about everything that had happened since Christmas. I had not lost my family. I had lost the illusion that love meant unlimited sacrifice. There was a difference. Real love could survive honesty. Real love could survive boundaries. And if a relationship could not survive those things, then maybe it was never as strong as I believed. I still loved Rebecca. I still cared about my family. But I finally understood that protecting my peace was not selfish. It was necessary. For the first time in many years, I was not measuring my life by how much I could give away. I was measuring it by how much meaning I could create with the time I had left. I thought the hardest part of changing my life would be standing up to my family. But I soon discovered that the hardest part was accepting that. People sometimes reveal their true feelings when they realize they can no longer benefit from you in the same way. After my conversation with Rebecca, I hoped things would continue improving. I did not expect everything to change overnight. I understood that trust takes time. But I also knew that real change required more than words. It required choices. As the weeks passed, I noticed small differences in the way my family interacted with me. Some changes were positive. Others revealed truths I had not wanted to see before. My nephew started calling more often just to talk. My niece Emily began visiting on weekends, and we spent afternoons baking together, like we used to when she was younger. Those moments reminded me that not every relationship had been damaged. Some people simply needed the chance to see me as a person instead of someone who could solve problems. But Rebecca's relationship with the rest of the family was changing too. I noticed that some relatives who had supported her request at Christmas became quieter. Perhaps they realized they had been too quick to judge. Perhaps they began questioning whether asking someone for $9 million was really about family. One afternoon, my brother-in-law called me. His name was Richard, and he had always been a quiet person who avoided difficult conversations. "Margaret, I owe you an apology," he said. I sat down at the kitchen table as I listened. "At Christmas, I should have said something. I should have asked how you felt instead of assuming you should help." His honesty surprised me. "Richard, I appreciate you saying that," I replied. "But I also understand why people stayed quiet. Sometimes it is easier to agree with the loudest person in the room." He sighed. "I think we forgot that you are human too." Those words meant more than he probably realized, because that was exactly what had hurt me the most. It was not the request for money. It was the feeling that my years of love, support, and presence could be ignored because of what I had in my accounts. A few days later, I received an invitation from Rebecca. She wanted to have dinner at her house. I accepted because I believed that if we were going to rebuild our relationship, we needed to spend time together without talking about money. When I arrived, the atmosphere was different from Christmas. There were no expectations. No one was waiting for me to make a decision. Rebecca had prepared dinner herself, which was something she rarely did. As we sat together, she looked nervous. "I have been thinking about everything," she said. I listened carefully. I realized now that I was focusing on what you had instead of what you had been through. I appreciated her honesty. "Rebecca, I never wanted you to feel like you could not ask for help," I said. "But I needed to know that my love was not measured by how much I could give." She nodded. "I understand that now." That conversation did not erase the past. It did not magically turn everything back to the way it was before. But it created something new. A relationship built on honesty instead of assumptions. On my drive home that night, I thought about the woman I had been before Christmas. I was someone who believed keeping everyone happy was the same as creating peace. Now I understood that true peace comes from being honest about what you need and allowing others to be responsible for their own choices. When I arrived home, I opened my front door and looked around at the life I had built. The house was quiet, but it no longer felt lonely. It felt peaceful. I walked into my office and looked at the documents on my desk. My financial decisions were still mine to make. My future was still mine to shape. But I no longer felt the need to prove my generosity to anyone. I had spent years showing my family that I loved them. Now I was learning to show myself that I mattered too. The months after Christmas taught me something I never expected to learn at my age. I thought the biggest changes in life happened through dramatic moments. But sometimes the most important changes happen quietly, in the choices we make when no one is watching. I no longer felt the need to explain myself every time someone questioned my decisions. I no longer felt guilty for protecting the future I had spent decades building. For the first time in years, I felt comfortable making choices based on my own values instead of other people's expectations. One morning, I sat in my office with Susan, my attorney, and reviewed the final changes to my estate plans. The room was quiet except for the sound of papers moving across the desk. These documents represented years of work, but they also represented something deeper. They represented freedom. Susan looked through the final pages and asked, "Margaret, are you certain this is what you want?" I smiled because I knew exactly why she asked. She wanted to make sure my decisions came from peace, not disappointment. "I am certain," I said. "I am not doing this because I am angry. I am doing this because I finally understand what matters to me." The changes were not about removing people from my life. They were about creating a future that reflected my beliefs. I decided that a significant portion of my resources would support causes that had always been important to me. My husband and I had often talked about helping young entrepreneurs and supporting community programs. It was something we believed in long before money became part of the conversation. I also made sure that my family would be cared for in a way that encouraged responsibility, not dependence. I wanted my generosity to create opportunities, not expectations. When the news eventually reached my family, everyone reacted differently. Some people understood immediately. Others struggled with the idea that my decisions were no longer centered around what they wanted. Rebecca called me one evening. Her voice sounded uncertain. "Margaret, I heard about your plans." I knew what she meant. "Yes," I said calmly. "I have been planning my future." She paused. I guess part of me thought everything would go back to normal after our conversation. I looked around my living room, remembering all the years I had spent trying to keep things normal for everyone else. "Rebecca, I think this is normal now," I said. "This is what a healthy relationship looks like. We care about each other, but we also respect each other's choices." She was quiet. Then she said, "I never realized how much pressure I put on you." I appreciated those words because they showed growth. Sometimes people do not see the weight they place on someone else until that person stops carrying it, I replied. After that conversation, things between us continued to change slowly. Rebecca started reaching out without asking for anything. She called to tell me about her week. She asked about my garden. She wanted to know how I was doing. Those small things meant more than any large gesture because they showed that she was rebuilding the relationship for the right reason. Not because of what I could provide, because I was her sister. That summer, I hosted a small gathering at my home. It was not a large family event like Christmas. There was no pressure.
Non-comfortable conversations.
Just people sharing a meal and enjoying each other's company. Rebecca brought dessert. Emily helped me arrange flowers from the garden. Richard told stories that made everyone laugh. As I looked around the table, I realized something important. I had spent so much time afraid of losing my family that I forgot I also had the power to create a healthier relationship with them. I had not lost the people I loved. I had simply stopped allowing love to be measured by what I could give. That evening, after everyone left, I sat outside with a cup of tea and watched the sunset over my garden. The peaceful feeling I had searched for was finally there. My worth had never been hidden inside a bank account. It had always been in the person I was, the life I built, and the love I gave freely. The difference was that now I understood I deserved that same love in return. One year after that Christmas evening, I found myself standing in my kitchen preparing another holiday meal. The decorations were different. The tree was smaller. The house felt a little quieter than it had in previous years. But the feeling inside me was completely different. I was no longer preparing a celebration because I was afraid of losing my family. I was preparing it because I wanted to share a moment with people I loved. There was a time when I believed family meant constantly giving pieces of yourself away. I thought being a good sister, a good relative, and a good person meant always being the one who sacrificed. But life has a way of teaching us lessons we never expected to learn. I learned that love without respect becomes exhausting. I learned that generosity without boundaries can create unhealthy expectations. Most importantly, I learned that my value was never determined by what I could provide for others. That Christmas dinner had changed the way I saw everything. Before that night, I thought losing my family's approval would be the most painful thing I could experience. But what hurt even more was realizing I had spent years trying to earn a place in the lives of people who should have valued me without conditions. I had been so focused on being needed that I forgot I deserved to be appreciated. Over the past year, my relationship with Rebecca slowly transformed. It was not perfect. We still had moments where we misunderstood each other. We still had years of habits to overcome. But something important had changed. We were finally building a relationship between two sisters, not between a person who gave and a person who expected. Rebecca started calling just to talk. She asked about my garden. She told me about her plans. She shared parts of her life that had nothing to do with money. Those conversations meant more to me than any request she could have made. They showed me that she was finally seeing me as Margaret, her sister, not Margaret, the person with financial resources. My family also changed in small ways. They became more thoughtful. They asked questions before making assumptions. They started understanding that my choices were mine to make. I never wanted them to feel guilty. I never wanted them to regret needing help. I simply wanted them to understand that love should never feel like a financial obligation. One afternoon, I sat in my garden and looked at the flowers I had planted years earlier with my husband. The same garden that had been there through every chapter of my life. Through success. Through loss. Through loneliness. Through change. I realized that I had spent so much time worrying about what I might lose that I had forgotten to appreciate what I already had. I had my health. I had my memories. I had people who were learning to love me in a healthier way. And I had myself. That last one was something I had forgotten for a long time. I used to believe that my greatest achievement was building a successful company and creating financial security. Now I understood that my greatest achievement was becoming a woman who could stand confidently without needing everyone's approval. The money I earned gave me comfort, but it never gave me my identity. My choices, my kindness, and the way I treated people were the things that truly defined me. Looking back, I do not remember that Christmas as the day my family hurt me. I remember it as the day I finally saw the truth. It was the day I stopped asking whether I was valuable to other people and started remembering that I had value all along. Sometimes the hardest moments in life are the ones that reveal what needs to change. And sometimes the greatest gift is not something someone gives you. Sometimes it is the moment you finally choose yourself.